Are you ready to question everything you thought you knew about the universe? Prepare to have your skepticism shattered as we unveil a collection of videos so mind-blowing, so inexplicable, they'll leave you convinced that we are not alone. These aren't your typical blurry UFO sightings. These are close encounters of the extraordinary kind, captured in stunning detail and backed by credible witnesses. From inexplicable aerial maneuvers to chilling interactions with otherworldly beings, these videos will challenge your perception of reality and ignite your curiosity about the vastness of the cosmos. Brace yourself for a journey into the unknown, where the truth is stranger than fiction.
If you can believe it.
There are alien sightings and encounters that are more believable than Roswell.
Yeah, that's a pretty crazy take.
We found some good ones here for you.
We did. Check it out.
We're gonna start off the list with a pretty insane news story that didn't really make the rounds over here, which is surprising because this is absolutely nuts. So last year, residents of a small isolated village in Peru claimed to have been attacked in the night by 7-foot-tall alien beings with glowing yellow eyes. They also had dark hoods and wore armor. They looked a bit like Green Goblin from Spider-Man. At one point, one of the beings even tried to kidnap a young woman of the village. And these attacks happened repeatedly, to the point where many villagers said they were living in fear. A number of residents claimed to have fired at the creatures, but they didn't go down. They could also fly. This was all over South American news. The Peruvian military was even called in to do night patrols. So what the hell was going on here? Well, the media has now come out saying that the attacks weren't aliens, but they were just illegal miners dressed as aliens trying to scare the villagers off. But how does that explain them being seemingly immune to bullets or flying? Carlos Castro Quintanilla, the prosecutor investigating the case, believes that the miners must have been using state-of-the-art technology that allowed them to fly. What does he think these illegal miners, what do they somehow have access to jetpacks? I don't know. I'm not buying that. I'm on the fence about this one. It could be illegal miners. Maybe they had bulletproof vests, but the jetpack thing, I've seen real life jetpacks and they are clunky messes. They're just, first of all, no one has access to those things. And even like flying them around, it's not a smooth kind of thing. We don't have jetpacks, all right? Plus, I think these villagers are smart enough to know the difference between people in masks and awful jetpacks and alien beings. I don't know. A whole bunch of these villagers all said they saw this, so it's interesting.
Next up, we have the Battle of Los Angeles, or the Great Los Angeles Air Raid, which took place on February 23rd of 1942, just 2 months after the attack on Pearl Harbor. That night, all of Los Angeles went under blackout as directed by the US military, meaning all lights were off. And while the lights on the ground had been turned off, the sky above was lit up by a myriad of strange, unidentified flying objects. The military opened fire, and onlookers were absolutely stunned as 1,400 rounds of ammunition fired up into the sky appeared to have no effect on the UFO or UFOs. Smoke filled the sky, and when it cleared, not a single craft was to be found, in the sky or on the ground. Shrapnel that appeared to have ricocheted off of the target resulted in the death of 5 civilians. 3 more were killed in car accidents due to the chaos of the event, and 2 more of heart attacks due to the stress of the 2-hour-long attack. To this day, it is unknown what objects filled the sky of Los Angeles that night. The event went down in history as one of the largest UFO sightings to date. We really don't know what happened, but if you have any theories, feel free to let us know in the comments.
Next on the list, we have the Shag Harbor incident. At 11:20 p.m. on October 4th, 1967, multiple witnesses in Nova Scotia watched as a mysterious object crashed into the waters of Shag Harbor. But let's backtrack a little and go over some of the other sightings from that night leading up to this. It all began with Air Canada Flight 305, where First Officer Robert Ralph alerted Captain Pierre Charbonneau to a strange object outside the aircraft over Sherbrooke in Saint John, Quebec. It was described as a brightly lit rectangular object with smaller lights trailing it. Meanwhile, Daryl Dory and his family in Mahone Bay saw a large object in the sky. Captain Leo Howard Mercy, a fisherman, witnessed stationary blips on his radar. He, along with his crew, then looked up to see 4 bright objects in a rectangular formation in the sky. News stations were also being flooded with numerous other people reporting glowing objects over Halifax. And then we have the crash. A ton of residents reported hearing a whoosh, followed by a loud bang, and at least 11 people reported seeing a low-flying object crash into the water of Shag Harbor. I'm sure you hear a lot of banging sounds around Shag Harbor. Terrible joke. Witnesses watched as an object with glowing lights floated in the water. It was just kind of like floating there. The RCMP was then called in, who then contacted the Rescue Coordination Center, but before they could arrive, the object started to sink into the water. The Coast Guard was called in, as well as the military. No debris or survivors were found, and according to the Rescue Coordination Center in Halifax, all commercial, private, and military aircraft, they were all accounted for along the eastern seaboard. Whatever this object was, it's never been identified, and it has been officially designated as an unidentified flying object.
Next on our list today, we have the North Yorkshire, England event, which took place in 1952. Reports of a bright silver disc-shaped object the size of a large bus hovering in the sky began spreading across the country. The aircraft was witnessed by people from many different towns, as well as Royal Air Force pilots. In the days that followed, more similar objects were spotted in the skies above the county. People described the aircrafts as being even larger than the one in the first sighting, and described their maneuvers as being impossible for any known aircraft at the time. The events went on for many days and had hundreds of witnesses. Some even used radar technology to track the unknown craft, but no one was able to figure out its origin. Speculation of the UFO being an alien spaceship quickly took off, with others believing that the spherical ships belonged to the government and that they had been deployed into the sky for some kind of super secret military operation. Well, here's the thing. The event took place over 70 years ago, and the government has yet to fess up to the ships being theirs, which at this point you'd think they would have done, right? I mean, to be fair, if they did fess up by now, I probably still wouldn't believe them, but I want to know what you guys think. Alien spacecraft or yet another government cover-up story?
Next up is the Cash Landrum incident. On the evening of December 29th, 1980, Betty Cash, Vicki Landrum, and Vicki's grandson Colby Landrum were driving home to Dayton, Texas after dining out when they encountered a mysterious diamond-shaped object emitting flames and intense heat. It was floating above the trees. At first, Landrum, thinking it was a sign of the second coming, told Cash to stop the car. Cash considered turning back, but the road was too narrow. The object was described as intensely bright, with small blue lights descending toward the road, emitting flames periodically. Cash and Landrum had gotten out of the car to look at the object, but got back in when the heat became more and more intense. It got so bad that it burned Cash's hand when she touched the car. Landrum even left a handprint on the dashboard. Then the object started ascending again, and after it was back up in the air, a group of military helicopters surrounded it. So after making it back home that night, the three started feeling off, reporting symptoms like nausea and skin burns after the encounter, with Cash experiencing severe health issues, including large blisters and clumps of her hair falling out. Vicki developed a cataract, and Betty was diagnosed with cancer later on. Symptoms resembling radiation exposure, really looks like. The two went on to seek legal action, suing the US government for $20 million, but the case ended up being dismissed.
Alright, next on our list we have the Gorman incident. In October of 1948, Second Lieutenant George F. Gorman was flying a P-15 Mustang aircraft during a training flight. Everything seemed to be going pretty routine until he noticed a strange object in the sky. At first he assumed it to be some type of weather balloon or other kind of experimental aircraft, but as he flew closer to the object to get a better observation, he realized it was something entirely different. He described it as some kind kind of pulsating, glowing ball of light. He tried to fly away from it, but to his surprise, the object began to follow him. Gorman tried to outmaneuver the unidentifiable flying object, but he was unsuccessful. He claimed that it appeared as though the UFO could anticipate his moves before they even happened. After a while, Gorman began to get seriously freaked out, and in a final attempt to lose this strange glowing ball, he decided the best plan of action was a nosedive. He dove the plane directly towards the ground, and after a 27-minute chase, he was able to lose the object. He leveled out his plane and lived to tell the tale. But no one, including Gorman, knows exactly what was seen in the sky that day. But what's even crazier is that after the incident, his plane tested positive for radioactivity. No one knows why. That's so wild.
Next on the list is the Alderney UFO sighting. On April 23, 2007, pilot Ray Boyer and his passengers observed a strange light while flying near Alderney. At first he thought it was reflected light, but soon realized that it was an object, estimating its size to be about a mile wide. He described it as bright yellow gold with black bands on the side. He also spotted a second object, similar but further away. Boyer reported the sighting to authorities, labeling it a near miss. Now, despite his report, the British Ministry of Defense didn't carry out an investigation, stating it occurred in French airspace. Witnesses on Boyer's aircraft and another pilot from Blue Islands confirmed seeing similar objects. One described it as sunlight colored and another as an elongated oval.
Next up, we have a UFO sighting at the O'Hare International Airport in Chicago. The incident took place at 4:15 p.m. on November 7th of 2006, so it's actually pretty recent. 12 different airport employees reported seeing a large saucer-shaped, unidentified flying object hovering over one of the airport gates, gate C-17 to be exact. And it was actually hovering above another aircraft that had been set to depart O'Hare but was delayed because there was a giant flying saucer hovering above it. Duh. The pilots in the plane, along with mechanics on the ground and airline management, reported to have seen the object. But air traffic controllers, however, did not see it because for some reason the craft above the plane was not picked up on their radars. The UFO was visible for several minutes before it suddenly disappeared. And even though the incident had many credible witnesses and was later investigated by the Federal Aviation Administration, no explanation was ever given regarding the events of the day.
Alright, the Travis Walton case. So this story has it all. A UFO sighting corroborated by multiple witnesses and a supposed encounter with alien beings. So it was November 5th, 1975. Travis Walton and his fellow loggers had finished up their day in the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest in Arizona. They loaded onto their truck and began the drive back home. They hadn't gotten far though when they noticed odd lights hovering above some trees. They decided to drive closer to see what was going on, and that's when they saw a massive unidentified object. Travis got out of the truck to see what the thing was, and then was suddenly lifted into the air by a beam of light. The rest of his friends drove out of there in a panic, but knew they couldn't leave him there. By the time they returned to the scene though, Travis was gone, and he would be missing for days. 5 days after disappearing, Travis Walton showed up again though. He placed a call to his sister's place from a phone booth outside of town. He was found disoriented and disturbed and began telling this horrifying story about how he'd woken up in a hospital-like room where two bald, alien-like entities were looking down at him. He tried to fight the creatures off before a human being wearing a helmet led him to another room where 3 other humans put a plastic mask over his face. He then lost consciousness again before waking up by the side of the highway.
And to finish off our list today, we have the possible involvement of a UFO in the disappearance of an F-89C Scorpion jet fighter. The aircraft had been used in a training mission over Lake Superior in Michigan in 1953. It had left from the Kincheol Air Force Base, I apologize if I'm saying that wrong, with 2 incredibly experienced pilots at its controls. As it tends to, everything was going smoothly until it wasn't. All of a sudden, the plane had disappeared from the tracking radars on the ground, and it was replaced by something else. An object that was moving around erratically and rapidly. Ground operators were unable to identify what it might be, but knew that it couldn't possibly be the missing aircraft due to its movements. Eventually, that object also vanished from the radar. An investigation was conducted on the disappearance of the jet fighter as well as the pilots on board, as well as the origin of the second radar detection. But it should come as a shock to none of you that the investigation revealed absolutely nothing. But officials did say that based on the pilot's level of expertise and the relatively easy nature of the flight, it's highly unlikely that their disappearance was an accident. But what do you guys think? Project Serpo, a secret government exchange program with extraterrestrial beings.
Did astronauts visit a distant planet and interact with alien beings? And are they still in cahoots with the government to this day?
A top secret exchange program between the United States government and planet Serpo, located in the Zeta Reticuli star system, aka the planet of the short grays. The project was allegedly created under the administration of President John F. Kennedy after the US government saved the life of an alien, EVA-1, who crash landed on Earth back in 1947. Entirely grateful and forever indebted to humanity, the alien began working with the US government and teaching them about his home planet, Serpo. When EVA-1 died, he left behind communications technology, which the government then used to eventually get into contact with other Serpo natives. That is when the government made arrangements to send 12 specially trained astronauts to planet Serpo so that they may learn about life outside of our atmosphere. In order to reach Serpo, the 12 astronauts had to travel through a wormhole, after which the majority of them got sick and one unfortunately died of an aneurysm. But of course they kept going and eventually they reached the alien planet. For a decade they studied life on Serpo before returning home and assuming entirely new identities in order to protect the security of the mission. Fair enough, I suppose.
So what are the origins of this Project Serpo tale? Well, like with most conspiracies in the modern age, it started gaining popularity online and took off from there. It all started in 2005 when a series of anonymous emails began circulating among UFO researchers and enthusiasts. These emails, which were allegedly from a retired US government official who remained anonymous, laid out this insane story about an extraterrestrial exchange program. We'll talk more about this anonymous individual later. The Project Serpo story started making the rounds way faster than these types of stories would have back in the day. It was 2005, the internet was still relatively new, in the grand scheme of things anyway, and the UFO community was just hungry for new, sensational stories. And this one, it's pretty much the definition of sensational.
Remember that alien that I mentioned, EVA-1, that crash landed to Earth in 1947? Yeah, well that was actually the Roswell incident of 1947, and also the first time the US government supposedly made contact with aliens. As many of you are probably already aware, in 1947 an unidentified object crash landed on some farmland in Roswell, New Mexico. When Area 51 was alerted of the incident, they rushed to the scene, collected the object, and released a statement saying that what had come spiraling down to Earth a few nights prior was nothing more than a weather balloon. But then they sent the object out to another base for testing, and another, and another. Why? Well, because it wasn't actually a weather balloon. It was an alien spacecraft containing 6 aliens, 5 of which had died in the crash, and one of which came to be known as Extraterrestrial Biological Entity Number 1, or EVA-1. EVA-1 was taken to the Air Force facility in Los Alamos, where he stayed until his death in 1952. During this time, he learned to communicate with the military and told them some pretty interesting things.
Now, if the US government is really working with these alien beings, where might they be carrying out their activities? Area 51? Some hidden base in Antarctica? Well, some say they could be operating from an even more top secret place. Dulce Base. Dulce Base supposedly sits deep beneath the Colorado-New Mexico border, close to Dulce, New Mexico. Dulce Base is said to be a secret facility where humans and aliens are working together, exchanging ideas and doing all sorts of experiments. Multiple levels deep underground with high-tech labs. The rumors are that different alien species, from the Greys, from planet Serpo possibly, to the reptilians, are working hand in hand with the US government. As to what they're trying to accomplish, probably something really fun and good that we don't really need to bother worrying about. Stories about this place really started coming about from a man named Paul Benowitz, who claimed to have discovered an underground base near Dulce, full of gray aliens and humans. His claims caught a lot of attention, but Bennewitz's mental health eventually declined, and he ended up in a mental hospital, passed away in 2003. There's always been this rumor that he was part of a big, widespread misinformation campaign.
As I said, during EBA 1's time on Earth, he informed the US government of quite a few things. One being that Serpo natives, Ebens as they are referred to by humans, had actually been visiting Earth for the last 2,000 years with no issue. But unfortunately, this time new Earth radar technology that they don't have on Serpo caused the ship to go haywire and crash, killing the majority of the crew. In 1949, a similar thing happened. 6 Ebens crash landed, but this time unfortunately none of them made it. When the ship was examined, the military found a communications device, which they worked on with EBA 1 to repair. They got it working and sent out multiple distress signals, but it wasn't until after EBA 1's death in 1952 that they finally got a reply. Communications began between the US military and the Ebens. It took a while, but eventually they were able to understand one another. After learning about the 12 deceased Ebens stranded on Earth, the Ebens asked if they could come to Earth and retrieve the bodies. Of course, the military wanted something in return, so they came up with the exchange program. The military wanted tech, but the Ebens said, no, you're not ready for our tech. And so they proposed something else. In exchange for the bodies of their deceased, 12 astronauts could spend a decade on planet Serpo. Furthermore, an Eben would stay on Earth to assist the military. In 1964, the Ebens landed on Earth once again to retrieve the bodies, and Project Serpo, aka Project Crystal Night, as it has also been called, commenced.
The star system where these aliens are supposedly from has been at the center of some of the most famous alien abduction stories in history, including the Barney and Betty Hill abduction. Were these beings from Serpo, Ebens, or Greys, as they're typically called, responsible for abductions like this? The Barney and Betty Hill case is pretty interesting. In September of 1961, this American couple was driving through rural New Hampshire at night when they noticed strange lights in the sky that seemed to be tracking their car's movements. Barney decided to stop the car to get out and have a look, and what he allegedly saw were humanoid figures peering out from a hovering craft. The Hills peeled off as fast as they could, but they later realized they'd lost a pretty hefty chunk of time that they just didn't remember. But as the days passed, they started to remember things. They ended up reporting being taken aboard a UFO where they were subjected to medical examinations by beings described as small, with gray skin, oversized eyes, and tiny little anime mouths, which is that's the exact way they described it back then. It's a 60s term, anime mouths. Their account was one of the earliest descriptions of the now iconic image of your classic gray alien.
Of course, a regular mission to space is no walk in the park, but a mission to a faraway planet located in a star system entirely separate from our own, that's tough. And apparently so was the training process. It took an entire year of survival, escape, evasions, weapons, and psychological training for the 12 astronauts to become fully prepared for their mission. The crew consisted of scientists, linguists, pilots, 2 doctors, and a security officer. Over the course of a year, along with the standard training, one by one, each member of the crew was buried in a 6 by 5 foot box and kept there for 5 days. As part of a training intensive, there was no light, no communication. Just a small air hole that allowed the astronauts to receive food and water and not suffocate to death. It was tough, but they all passed, and the pilots even went on to learn how to operate alien spacecrafts. When it came time to take off, the 12 astronauts, along with 40 tons of gear, which included 10 motorcycles and 3 jeeps, were loaded into the spacecraft using anti-gravity technology, and 1 Eben came along to assist in their journey. When the ship was all boarded, each astronaut went to their own individual pod and settled in for the long journey ahead.
All right, before we get to what they saw on that journey, let's have a little bit of fun here and talk about something that comes up more than you'd probably think when Project Serpo or just interactions between aliens and humans is discussed. Hybrids. Yeah, aliens creating human-alien hybrids, either through experimentation or, God forbid, actually getting it on. This kind of thing always feels like it's going down the same rabbit hole that creepy online fan fiction does, where it's like, I'm gonna write about my fantasy of Alf impregnating Willie Tanner. I don't know. I'm not trying to shame, live your lives, but the concept of humans and aliens breeding with each other always feels inherently silly to me. With that said though, this does often play into the Project Serpo conspiracy. Those astronauts were apparently on this planet for a while. Who knows who they met? One thing could have led to another. Plus, in all these reported UFO abduction cases, who knows what kind of nasty experiments those Greys could have been doing.
When the crew arrived at Serpo, the first thing they noticed was that it was barren, bright, and hot. Really hot. About 107 degrees Fahrenheit or 41 degrees Celsius. Quickly, they realized why. Planet Serpo had 2 suns, which are shown here in a photograph taken by one of the astronauts. Allegedly. One of the suns was orbited by Serpo, and the other was off in the distance. Because of this, the planet never got dark, and the days were 40 hours long, meaning that their decade-long mission was actually going to take 13 human years. In total, there are about 650,000 Ebens living on the planet in small, separate village communities and houses made of some kind of concrete rubber substance. It was a primitive life, but at the same time, the Ebens were equipped with electricity and incredibly advanced technology. Families generally consisted of a male and female Eben, and each family was allowed to have a maximum of 2 children, which were hidden away until they reached the age of maturity. During their time on Serpo, the astronauts gathered as much information about the Ebens as they could. And if you guys remember, I do believe I mentioned that one of the astronauts died on transit. Apparently the Ebens used that astronaut to clone and create hybrids of, like James mentioned. And it was then that the remaining astronauts realized that they weren't as peaceful as they once thought them to be. When it came time to return home, for some reason, 2 of the astronauts actually decided to stay, and then 2 more astronauts died on the way back to Earth. The surviving astronauts were given a large sum of money and an entirely new identity. That's great and all, but many of them were suffering from radiation poisoning due to the 2 suns and died soon after their return to Earth.
One of the most avid supporters of the Project Serpo conspiracy is a man named Richard Doughty, who we can't really talk about Serpo without talking about this guy. See, Richard Doughty has made some pretty outlandish claims, so outlandish that there's a whole other conspiracy that spawned around him and other government officials like him. Supposedly, Doughty was the man behind those anonymous emails I talked about earlier. Richard Doughty is a retired special agent who used to work for AFOSI, the United States Air Force Office of Special Investigation. But a lot of people think he wasn't actually investigating UFOs, but that he was part of a team spreading misinformation intentionally, basically muddying the waters and leaking supposedly secret info about the government's exchange program with alien beings in order to confuse the public, making it hard for us to tell what's real or not. Of course, the purpose behind the misinformation is, of course, to distract everyone from the actual nefarious things the government is up to. I mean, who doesn't get excited about aliens, right? I'm sure we'd all rather believe that the worst thing the government is doing is working with extraterrestrials instead of them doing some shady stuff at our own expense. Could there be some genuine truth about the planet Serpo thing? I mean, sure, maybe, but you know, just something to keep in mind with stuff like this.
Between radioactivity, death rays, and intergalactic crystals,
the world's biggest explosion is definitely something worth exploring, and as for what caused it, pretty wild theories.
On June 30th of 1908, an inexplicable explosion as powerful as 12 million tons of TNT lit up the skies near the Podjamanaya Tunguska River in Russia, killing an estimated 3 civilians, although some people believe it decimated an entire village, and it also took out over 5,000 acres of forest area. Not only that, but the trees and soil were radioactively burnt. This is what came to be known as the Tunguska event. It was and still is the largest impact event to take place on Earth in recorded history. Hundreds of times more powerful than the atomic weapons dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima combined. The explosion registered at seismic stations all across Eurasia, and airwaves from the blast were detected all the way from Russia to Germany, Denmark, Croatia, Dutch East Indies, and even Washington, D.C. In some places, the shock was equivalent to an earthquake measuring of 5 on on the Richter scale, and people living in villages nearby claim to have seen a pillar of fire reaching up into the sky. In the days that followed the event, the skies above Asia and Europe were illuminated, never going fully dark. While it was originally assumed that a massive meteor had crash landed on Earth, it was later revealed that something had exploded at an altitude of 5 to 10 kilometers above the ground. Also, eyewitnesses never mentioned seeing a meteor falling from the sky, so what the heck could have caused such devastation? We have some theories.
Really, the next question is, though, did the government attempt to downplay the whole thing? Did they not want people to know the real story? See, people have been questioning the circumstances of the event ever since it happened because there's never really been a solid explanation. The closest we've ever gotten is that it was caused by an asteroid or meteoroid, but there was no impact crater and no leftover material. On top of that, people reported seeing a blue light in the sky right before the bang. What the hell was that about? It really doesn't seem like a stretch to say the Russian government was hiding or downplaying something that happened or something they even had a direct hand in themselves. Were they testing something? Did they find something they didn't want the world to know about? Something to do with extraterrestrials, perhaps? More on that from Hannah.
Well, the crystal remains of an unknown technical device sure do point to aliens. In the early 2000s, a story broke when a researcher named Yuri Lavbin claimed to have found several strange crystal blocks which had originally been discovered in the blast zone region. Some of the crystals had incredibly intricate pictures on them, and some had very precise holes. Because of the crystal's nature and the fact that no technology on Earth has the capability to carve crystals with such precision, Yuri believes that they must be of alien origin and furthermore likely belonged to an extraterrestrial technical device. A few years later, Yuri Lavbin also credited whatever piece of technology the crystals came from with being the reason for humanity's continued existence, theorizing that an alien spacecraft had actually purposefully collided with a meteor so that it would explode above the Earth rather than crash into it, securing the end of humanity as we know it. While the opinions of Yuri are controversial, they are quite popular amongst the UFO community, and we personally here at Most Amazing Top 10 appreciate them as well.
Did Nikola Tesla cause the Tunguska event? On the day of the incident, Nikola Tesla was reportedly conducting a major experiment on the other side of the world. He was attempting to transmit vast amounts of electricity through the atmosphere. Firing up the generators, Tesla sent millions of volts of electricity into the sky, and apparently when he checked his equipment after the test, he said the exact words, "Uh-oh." One of Tesla's most mysterious inventions is the Tesla death ray. The idea of a directed energy weapon existed before Tesla, but if anyone could create it, it was gonna be him. The death ray technology was supposedly based on Tesla's high-frequency electricity experiments, where he believed energy could be wirelessly transmitted over long distances to a specific target. Tesla had apparently envisioned a portable generator powering the weapon, capable of destroying anything in its path. Armies, fleets, tanks, and even cities from a great distance. So, though no one officially saw the death ray in action, Tesla claimed his prototype worked. He'd even written letters to the New York Times talking about the invention's potential.
You know what's weird? The fact that 2 weeks prior to the Tunguska event, many people encountered something incredibly strange. Another event that took place in the skies above Karlinsky, a small village near where the Tunguska explosion took place. Many villagers claimed to have witnessed a white heavenly body in the sky that appeared to be under intelligent control and for some reason in the shape of a pipe. The light hovered in the sky for about 10 minutes before the sound of military weapons fire went off in the distance. In that moment, the bright light faded into a smoky gray before disappearing into a ball of smoke. Moments later, the ground began to shake before flames and bizarre shapes appeared across the skies above where the original light had been seen. Whether or not the events of that day are connected to the Tunguska blast are unknown, but it just seems like too big of a coincidence for the two not to be connected.
Some think the Russian government was directly involved in causing the incident, not just attempting to downplay it. The Tunguska blast was so powerful that it seemed like it couldn't have been just a natural event. So one theory is that the Russian government had been working on a top secret military experiment that went wrong. Or maybe it went exactly like they expected it to. Something causing this level of destruction would be a pretty powerful weapon. It's pretty obvious why they'd want to keep something like this a secret. Admitting it would mean revealing your powerful new weapon to the world. Not only would they be giving away military secrets, but it could have led to international panic. Plus, there would be huge backlash for causing such a destructive event, even if it was accidental. Plus, the remoteness makes for a pretty ideal spot to test something like this. The explosion had happened right in the middle of a highly populated urban area. I probably wouldn't be entertaining this theory as much. At least, I'd like to think the government wouldn't intentionally harm mass amounts of their own population in order to test a new weapon. But I don't know, maybe I'm just being, positive?
Copper cauldrons causing illness and firing off fireballs into the Russian Valley of Death. What does this have to do with the Tunguska event? Maybe nothing, but also maybe everything. The Valley of Death, located near where the Tunguska event took place, has been the subject of Russian legends for centuries. The valley was once a route for traders and smugglers, and apparently it was also home to many copper cauldron-like structures that stuck out of and into the ground that had large openings, big enough for both a man and his horse to enter into, which sounds great for weary travelers. I mean, free shelter, right? The only problem is those who spent the night in one of the many fabled copper cauldrons would later become incredibly ill, suffering from symptoms incredibly similar to those experienced by someone with radiation poisoning. Also, some people claim that on occasion the cauldrons would shoot balls of intense fire into the sky, and that they were active on the morning of July 30th of 1908. Could they have possibly been responsible for the event? I mean, between the radioactive properties and the fact that a fireball is exactly what was witnessed exploding above the ground at the time in which the Tunguska event took place, it's definitely a possibility. And if you're wondering why then have we not seen these cauldrons or heard of these cauldrons, I think the answer is pretty clear. 2 words: government cover-up.
Alright, a super wild theory is that the Tunguska event may have been caused by a black hole, which sounds nuts coming out of my mouth, sounded nuts reading it, but here we are. So it may be totally nuts, I just can't deny how interested I am in this one. The theory that a small black hole collided with the planet started being talked about in 1973 by American physicists. They theorized that a small black hole actually passed through the planet, which they said could have explained the lack of an impact crater and possibly the explanation for that mysterious blue light witnesses reported seeing in the sky right before the explosion. These physicists actually put forth that this black hole would have shot right through the planet and out the other side, which again is nuts, but an incredibly fun idea. As the team wrote in their paper, the black hole would enter the Earth, and the rigidity of the rock would allow no underground shockwave because of its high velocity, and because it loses only a small fraction of its energy in passing through the Earth, the black hole should very nearly follow a straight line through the Earth, entering at 30 degrees to the horizon and leaving through the North Atlantic. End quote. Unfortunately though, there's never been any evidence found of an exit wound, quote unquote.
While these theories are all good and fun, I feel as though I would be remiss not to mention the most obvious scientific explanation, and that is that a 650-foot asteroid almost wiped out an incredibly significant amount of life on Earth. With the asteroid traveling some 435 miles through the atmosphere, it kind of makes sense why it may have never actually made impact with the Earth and instead just exploded a bunch of times across the sky before evaporating just 5 to 10 kilometers above the ground in Russia. It is likely that this asteroid was made of a stony iron that kept its form until the very last moment, disintegrating fully just prior to impact. While this is the leading scientific theory, there are quite a few holes in this explanation. 1, asteroids aren't that radioactive. I mean, some of them are a little bit, but there was a lot of radioactivity going on around the blast site. 2, how did we get so lucky as to have the entire thing completely dissipate just moments before impact? And 3, what were those strange events leading up to the blast all about? I don't know, you guys, it seems like a pretty shaky theory to me. I feel like science is gonna have to take the back seat on this one.
Here's another really cool possible explanation: an antimatter collision. Astrophysicist Philip J. Wyatt wrote a paper in 1958 theorizing this. According to this theory, instead of a regular asteroid having exploded over Siberia as it plummeted into the atmosphere, maybe it was an antimatter comet or meteoroid. But what exactly is an antimatter comet? Well, we don't really know if these things exist. They're hypothetical, but the idea is that there could be comets and meteoroids composed entirely of antimatter. Scientists have described them as possible explanations for a bunch of different mysterious phenomena, including the Tunguska event. So what would have happened? Pretty simple really. When antimatter and regular matter meet, it causes an explosion. Well, if you ever need a trip away from the heat, just go to Antarctica. Wait a minute, you can't. You're not really allowed to go there, are you?
Probably, because of government secrets. There's stuff they don't want you knowing, they don't want you to see, but we have collected a list of those things, and we are going to share them with you today, so help us.
Let's get into it. Starting us off, we have a story about a massive structure that was found in Antarctica by a former Navy SEAL. So in 2018, this individual who had worked at the South Pole shared a pretty outlandish story with journalist Linda Moulton Howe. He chose to remain anonymous because the information he revealed was apparently highly classified. He said that in August of 2003, he and his team were on a top secret mission disguised as this research reconnaissance trip. Now, during the mission, they came across a large, dark structure protruding from the ice. They all looked at each other and said, "What the hell is that?" and decided to check it out. The structure had large square doors that slid back into the walls when pushed, revealing a long hallway inside. The interior was lit with a mysterious green light that didn't really seem to be coming from anywhere. The walls were also covered in strange hieroglyphics which no one recognized. Definitely a pretty out there story, but as we'll discuss more in this video, given that Antarctica is one of the most remote and unpopulated places on Earth, it would be a pretty ideal location for extraterrestrial beings to operate without being detected. Also, would you go into that structure, or would you just stay the hell away? I don't know, I might have gone in.
Next up, we have the fact that the government is hiding pyramids located in Antarctica, believed to have been built by a secret ancient civilization. In 2016, the discovery of the pyramids was made public. 3 large triangular prisms, one measuring over 1,222 meters, 4,000 feet tall, were found on the continent. That's over 10 times the height of the famous Great Pyramid of Giza located in Egypt, making this discovery kind of a big deal. While the government maintains that the structures are natural and that no records of ancient civilizations in the area exist, the public and us, we know better. The pyramids are too angular to be organic, and so it's highly likely that they are not, but rather were built by an ancient, highly advanced and intelligent civilization that inhabited Antarctica some 100,000 million years ago. Perhaps the Anunnaki? Conspiracy theorists believe that at one point in time Antarctica was the equator of Earth, and so living and building conditions would have been much better. Not only that, but if the government is actively hiding the structures and information about them from Google Earth and other search engines, they must have found something worth hiding. Perhaps some secrets of the universe, the cure for cancer, a renewable energy source. Only time will tell.
The Antarctic Impulsive Transient Antenna, or ANITA, experiment is a NASA-funded project using a bunch of antennas attached to a giant balloon that flies over Antarctica. It picks up radio signals from high-energy particles coming from deep space that encounter Earth's atmosphere. Now, some signals skim the Earth's surface before reaching ANITA, while others bounce off the ice. Now, during its flights in 2006 and 2014, ANITA detected some unusual signals that seemed to be coming from beneath the surface, which was strange. The signals should have been coming from out in space. Scientists also used another device called IceCube, a neutrino telescope with detectors buried near the South Pole. An IceCube can detect tiny flashes of light produced by particles when neutrinos pass through the ice. The idea here was that if ANITA's signals were from neutrinos, IceCube should also be able to detect them. But after analyzing 8 years of data, no matching signals were found in IceCube. Physicist Justin Vanderbroek from the University of Wisconsin-Madison pointed out that if the ANITA signals were astrophysical, they should have been detectable by IceCube, but they weren't. It's a mystery that still hasn't been solved. Some theories suggest that the signals could be from radio waves bouncing through the hidden caverns or lakes in the ice. Some scientists are even thinking these particles might be related to dark matter, which is thought to make up most of the universe's matter but has never been directly detected. But there's an even crazier idea that maybe these particles are coming from a parallel universe, one that is a mirror image of ours, and that's why these signals are coming from below rather than above. kind of hard to wrap your head around, but point is, scientists are really confused about it, and that's always really cool.
Going back to our earlier conversation about ancient and highly advanced civilizations living in Antarctica, many people believe that beneath the icy continent lies the forgotten, lost city of Atlantis, which makes a lot of sense if you believe the fact that Antarctica was once the equator of the planet. Atlantis was an ancient subtropical city, so it would have been somewhere warm during ancient times, not somewhere that's warm now. To take things a step further, it is believed by many and recorded in Charles Hapgood's book that the people of Atlantis migrated from Antarctica as temperatures began to cool to the Aztec, Mayan, and Egyptian empires in an effort to preserve their peoples and spread their knowledge. This would also explain the similarities between the empires, their advanced skill sets for their time, their teachings, and their archaeological structures. I'm just saying.
Now, I don't think there's anything cooler than the discovery of a brand new species, and in 2021 that's exactly what happened in Antarctica. A team of scientists from New Zealand were drilling in the Larsen ice shelf and actually discovered a never-before-seen ecosystem. They drilled about 1,640 feet into this massive ice sheet in the Antarctic Peninsula using a hot water hose. They sent a camera into the hole where they found this subterranean ice chamber, but soon they noticed their video feed was being obscured, and they weren't sure what was causing the problem at first. They might have thought their equipment was damaged, but pretty soon they realized that zipping through the water were hundreds of little shrimp-like creatures, scientifically known as amphipods. Now, small crustaceans living in the water, it doesn't seem all that exciting at first glance, but this team was very excited about this. They hadn't been expecting to find life thriving this deep below the ice. They'd found a never-before-seen ecosystem down below the Antarctic ice sheet. That's pretty cool. I mean, who knows what else could be living down there?
For this next one, guys, I'm gonna have to take a little liberties with my language so I don't breach guidelines. Let's get into it. Next up on the list today, we have the conspiracy theory that Antarctica is actually the hidden entrance to center Earth. In January of 2019, it was reported by NASA that scientists had discovered two craters deep beneath the permafrost of Antarctica that were first discovered by the team in 2006 and are believed by scientists to have been created by one of the many asteroids to hit Earth millions of years ago, and that led to the extinction of the dinosaurs. Conspiracy theorists, however, have a different idea as to what the crater might be, and that is the entrance to inner Earth, where a secret base reminiscent of World War II atrocities lies. If you're not seeing what I'm saying, you might want to pick up a history book, and I'm sure it'll hit ya. Beyond the base, it is believed that a tropical sanctuary dedicated to gluttony and profanity exists inside of the Earth, accessible to only the richest and most elite members of global society.
Speaking of the whole hollow earth thing though, next we have the reports made by American naval officer Richard E. Byrd after returning from an expedition to the South Pole. Operation High Jump, officially known as the United States Navy Antarctic Developments Program, took place from 1946 to 1947 and was led by Admiral Richard E. Byrd. Now, on the surface, this mission was about establishing a research base and training personnel to work in cold conditions, but could something else have been going on? Operation High Jump was actually, according to this theory, a covert military operation aimed at investigating this underground society beneath the ice. According to this story, he and his team actually flew into this underground entrance to the center of the Earth, where they came across what is often referred to as the Crystal City. Here there were extraterrestrial beings, strange aircraft. It was this entirely different world, and there was lush forests below the ice as well. Now, after having found it, Richard E. Byrd was pressured into keeping quiet about it, and the story didn't surface until years later when his journal was found, where he'd written about his account.
So circling back to the craters for a quick second, some people believe that the two craters located in Antarctica are not the entrance to Center Earth or even an incredibly racist military base, but rather the entrances to a secret alien UFO base. You see, rather than an asteroid, UFO conspiracy theorist Scott Warning believes that a UFO caused the crater when it crashed into Earth and became buried in the permafrost, and that now the crater is being used by the government to house other UFOs and evidence of extraterrestrial life and activity. He also claimed to have seen an unedited image of the crater in which he could see the UFO sticking out, but that now all evidence of the spacecraft has since been wiped from the internet.
Now, you're gonna have to stretch your suspension of disbelief for this one, if you haven't already done that, but I think this is a fun story. So Organism 46b is an urban legend centered around a mysterious aquatic creature allegedly discovered by Russian scientists while drilling in Voltok Lake. So this creature is said to be a gelatinous organism, almost like a giant squid with incredibly deadly venom and the ability to rapidly shapeshift and mimic other marine life. Now, according to the legend, Organism 46b has a unique method of hunting. It can extend a set of thin, flexible filaments from its body to paralyze and then consume its prey. The legend claims that Russian scientists experimented with this Organism 46b, attempting to understand its abilities to potentially weaponize them. Now, these experiments went wrong, resulting in the deaths of several researchers. Then the Russian government covered up the whole incident.
And finally, we have probably the most believable theory that the entirety of Antarctica is actually one big, highly unethical weapons testing facility. Many people believe that the reason for Antarctica being such a highly restricted zone is due to the fact that the world's leaders are using it, in collaboration with some highly intelligent but severely unethical scientists, to create unfathomable weapons of mind control and mass destruction. From explosives far more dangerous than the world's largest nukes, to chips that can be implanted into the human brain or slipped into our water supply to cause unwavering devotion to the world's upper class on a global scale. Basically, whatever you can think of that is terrifying, it's there. And if it's not, they're working on it. It's a pretty scary thought, but considering the track record of governments using secret testing facilities to test out secret weapons of mass destruction, it's really not that far out there. The Black Knight satellite, that's a fun one. It's an ancient alien probe orbiting Earth, maybe.
Has it been sent from the future? What is it? Where is it from? And why is it here?
Let's find out. A mysterious object orbiting Earth above our atmosphere, man-made with no earthly origins. It's the Black Knight satellite, an alien surveillance device used to monitor Earth for the past 13,000 years, or so they say. The device was first detected by Nikola Tesla in 1899 and then by Marconi and Jorgen Hals a few years later, and it was confirmed in the early 20th century by amateur radio operators, and it was first reported in the news in the late 1950s and early 1960s. Apparently, the satellite is not only a monitoring device deployed by aliens to observe the going-ons of Earth, but supposedly, based on radio signals coming from the contraption, it also contains a map to a faraway planet called Epsilon Bootis. Nice. While some skeptics have claimed the object to be nothing more than just a piece of old space junk, it should be noted that space junk doesn't exhibit many of the properties exhibited by the Black Knight satellite, especially sending out distinguishable and decodable radio signals.
This next question that's probably on your mind is, why is it here? And if you're not so sold on the alien thing, well, where could it be from then? Well, there are tons of possibilities, from something as boring as space junk, which is what NASA claims, to more outlandish but interesting ideas like a time capsule from the future. This idea is very Star Trek-y, but let's just imagine, if you will, for a moment that our future selves, hundreds or even thousands of years from now, have figured out how to send messages or artifacts back in time. Well, maybe the Black Knight satellite is one of these time capsules. Perhaps it could be carrying important info or advanced technology that could help us in the very near future. Maybe it has the solution to climate change, or a cure for some major disease that's coming in the very near future, or new energy sources. If we could crack the code, who knows how much it could boost our progress? What if the satellite is more like a history book, preserving our achievements and mistakes for future generations? This way, even if a disaster strikes, our story wouldn't be lost forever. The idea is kinda like sending a message in a bottle, of course, just way more high tech. And yeah, there's no real proof of this, but if things did get crappy enough in the distant future that we decided we needed to change the course of history, I mean, why wouldn't we try to send some kind of signal back in time if we had the ability to do so?
As I mentioned, the object was first discovered by Nikola Tesla, the inventor of the Tesla coil, in 1899 in Colorado Springs. Tesla had built a large tower to see if he could detect any going-ons in the atmosphere, and he did. Kind of. When the tower first began receiving transmissions, composed of numbers at regular intervals, he assumed that they were coming from the atmosphere. But it didn't take him long to realize that they were actually coming from above our atmosphere in space. He was quoted in a local paper saying, "I believe numbers are being used for communication because numbers are universal." A few years later, Marconi, the inventor of the wireless radio, intercepted the same signals, and a few years after that, a Norwegian engineer observed something as well. Jorgen Hals noticed that the transmissions coming from the object sent out on a certain wavelength were somehow being sent back to where they originated from a few seconds later, which isn't that weird. I mean, radio echoes aren't unheard of, but what was weird was the timing. You see, generally radio echoes are consistent and take place just a few seconds after the original signal hits its destination, but these ones were different. They were inconsistent, and some took up to 15 seconds to bounce back. The signals became known as long delayed echoes, or LDE, a phenomenon observed many times over the years that is still yet to be explained.
So in 1973, Scottish researcher and author Duncan Lunnon claimed to have discovered messages from a supposed alien probe. Lunnon analyzed those long-delayed radio echoes, which are strange signals bouncing back to Earth with that delay, and he thought these echoes contained a hidden message from an extraterrestrial probe orbiting Earth, the Black Knight. Lunnon's theory was that the satellite was sending a star map, pinpointing the Epsilon Bootis star system. And according to him, this message was from an alien civilization trying to communicate with us. According to him, the message went as follows. Start here. Our home is in Epsilon Bootis, which is a double star. We live on the 6th planet of 7 coming from the Sun, which is the larger of the two. Our 6th planet has 1 moon, our 4th planet has 3, our 1st and 3rd planets each have 1. Our probe is in the position of Arcturus, known in our maps.
So, a couple of guys found some irregular radio signals coming from space. So what? Well, this what? On May 14th of 1954, 3 years prior to Sputnik becoming the first satellite in orbit, newspapers received a story from Major Donald Keyhole, a Marine Corps major, naval aviator, and future founder of the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomenon, or NICAP. Keyhole told the papers that there were already 1 or possibly even 2 non-organic satellites already orbiting Earth. After the story broke, a group of government scientists began attempting to track the objects, when they came across radio signals that matched the description of the ones Tesla had found back in 1899. After that, NASA located the signal and France confirmed it. Years later, after Sputnik's deployment, the US began to worry if the signals might have been coming from a Russian spy satellite, but in 1957 that theory was disproved when a researcher from Venezuela noticed a mysterious object while observing Sputnik in its prograde orbit, west to east, along with the rotation of the Earth. This object was orbiting in retrograde, east to west, opposite the rotation of the Earth, which was technology that hadn't been invented yet, leading them to believe it must not have been made on Earth.
So this is said to be the first photographic evidence of the Black Knight, captured in 1998 during the STS-88 mission. It's a pretty fantastic image, not just because it's breathtaking, which it absolutely is, but because of how clear it is. There's an object floating through space here, clear as day. STS-88 was NASA's first space shuttle mission to the International Space Station. During the mission, astronauts aboard the Space Shuttle Endeavour captured a series of photographs that some believe show the mysterious Black Knight satellite. Now, a lot of people were very excited when these photos were released. Just what the hell was this thing? Were we really looking at a genuine UFO? Well, NASA kinda crashed the party. They just said the object was a thermal blanket that had come loose during a spacewalk, and sure, this was a letdown to some. To others, it didn't change anything. To people who believe in the satellite's mysterious origins, the thermal blanket story is just another cover-up.
Here's another. Of course, when it comes to the subject of an alien satellite that the general public has not yet been made explicitly aware of, there is obviously going to be a number of cover-ups involved. In this case, the cover-up of the research conducted by and presented to the Observatory of Paris by Jacques Vallée, who is still alive today and still incredibly passionate about the subject of the Black Knight satellite. Over the course of his career, Jacques observed, tracked, photographed, and even filmed the massive 15-ton satellite that, at the time, no rocket on Earth would have been able to deploy. When he was satisfied with the amount of evidence he had gathered, he presented his findings to the observatory for publishing. In response to his presentation, the observatory promptly confiscated his files, erased all of his photos, and destroyed his tapes. Their reason? They were embarrassed because they could not definitively say what the object was, nor could they source its exact origin. I smell BS.
That was me, by the way. I gotta hit the bathroom after this. So dumb. What if the Black Knight isn't from the future at all, but the exact opposite, the distant past, launched by our ancient ancestors using advanced technology, a lost civilization like Atlantis or some other unknown empire that had tech as good as or even better than ours? They might have sent the object up for all sorts of reasons, but the one that's most intriguing to me is that the Black Knight satellite could be a sort of time capsule containing sacred artifacts or even DNA from a highly advanced ancient civilization that knew it was on the decline. Or maybe they encoded messages in it to warn future generations about their mistakes to prevent suffering the same fate down the line. Yeah, I get it. Sounds like a great plot for a movie, but completely improbable. Improbable, sure, but not impossible. History may have many more secrets than we know.
If you're still not convinced about the existence of the Black Knight satellite, you should know that in 1963, an Air Force test and fighter pilot and astronaut, along with NASA ground crew and tracking stations, actually saw, documented, and reported it during a space mission, only to quickly rescind the claim and instead cover up the fact that the object ever existed. In 1963, Gordon Cooper, an experienced pilot, became one of the first astronauts to go to space. In April of that year, he boarded the Mercury 9, and shortly after, he was living his anti-gravity dreams over 6,214 miles above the Earth's surface. During his descent back down to Earth, the landing module suffered from a total systems failure, but luckily, Gordon was able to land the spacecraft manually just 4 miles off target. That's pretty impressive. But believe it or not, that was not actually the most interesting thing to happen on the mission. While in space, Gordon had seen a green glowing object that ground crew and tracking stations confirmed. Not only that, but the object appeared to have been orbiting the Earth in retrograde, east to west. Unheard of technology at the time. NBC News picked up the story, but by the time Gordon made it back to Earth, the press was restricted from asking any questions about what he had seen, and NASA had released a statement claiming that an electrical malfunction had caused high levels of carbon dioxide in the ship's compartment, and that Gordon had hallucinated the whole thing. For years, Cooper went along with the narrative, that is, until he retired and decided to spill the tea. He claimed that what he and the ground crew saw during the Mercury 9 mission was in fact real, and not only that, but during his time working for the Air Force, he had witnessed hundreds of saucer-shaped spacecrafts being tested on military bases. I guess loyalty to liars in government can only last for so long.
Now, I'm sure we'd all love to believe that the Black Knight is something cool, like an object sent from the future or an alien probe as discussed before, or even a mundane thing like a piece of space junk if you're more nervous about that sort of thing. But could there be something more nefarious going on? Always, right? Maybe it's part of some secret government government project. I mean, think about it. During the Cold War, the US and the Soviet Union were in a high-stakes race for technological and military superiority. It's entirely possible that one of these countries, or even another government, could have launched a covert satellite. And yes, as Hannah mentioned, it was supposedly first spotted long before the Cold War, but most of the attention to the Black Knight came in the 50s and 60s, so who knows if something else had been detected in the years prior. If the Black Knight is a government project, it could be used for all sorts of secret missions. It might be collecting intelligence, it could be monitoring communications, or even conducting space experiments that the public doesn't know about. Governments often keep advanced technology under wraps, and the Black Knight could be one of these hidden tools. This idea is definitely a much more down-to-earth explanation compared to time capsules or ancient tech, so I mean, who knows? Aside from space junk, this may be the next most possible explanation.